If you wanted the Khabib vs Tony fight to happen, then be sure to show this by liking this video.
Champion of the world, Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov.
Welcome back everybody to KENAN TV. As we all know right now, the fight between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson is most likely not going to be happening on the 18th of April. And just like many of you guys, with myself included, we all looked forward to that fight happening. But simply, it was not destined to happen at this time. Maybe it's not happening tomorrow, or the day after that. And perhaps in the future, this fight could be lined up, and it could happen. And I really hope it does. But if it doesn't, then well, it was just never meant to be. But for now, we can still ask ourselves the question, what if Khabib Nurmagomedov defeated Tony Ferguson? Or what if Tony Ferguson defeated Khabib Nurmagomedov and became the 1 in 28-1 and the new undisputed lightweight UFC world champion? In today's video, which will be episode 1, I will talk about what if Khabib Nurmagomedov were to defeat Tony Ferguson. So with that being said, let us jump right into the video. If Khabib Nurmagomedov defeated Tony Ferguson, not only will we have a final, conclusive ending to this much anticipated fight, but at the same time, if Khabib were to win, we would undoubtedly be looking in the face of the greatest lightweight UFC fighter this division has ever seen. And that, right now, in the sports, in the UFC's 25-year-old career, there has never ever been a feat quite like his. And for that, we really would have to understand the magnitude of that feat. Khabib Nurmagomedov at that point would not only be the legend of the lightweight division, but he would be the pound-for-pound #1 fighter of right now. And for him to achieve that status, along with being the lightweight great, there would simply be nothing that could ever top what he has done. Being a fighter that is on a 12-0 win streak in the UFC, it has been done before. People have gone on to win many fights back-to-back in the UFC, right? But there has never been a fighter who would be as dominant against his early MMA opponents in his professional career as against the elite of the UFC. Dominate from beginning to end. Now, in this fantasy occasion, we don't really know how the fight between Khabib and Tony would be playing out. But assuming that Khabib would win this fight, aside from, let's just say, there happens to be some rough moments in this hypothetical scenario, Khabib would most likely end up winning the same way he has always done, which is by, in the end, getting the control of the opponent, imposing his will, and securing the victory by whichever way was necessary. And with that win over Tony Ferguson, we would finally have a conclusive ending to this crazy saga between these two. After all the fight cancellations, after all the letdowns, after all the tragedies and accidents, we would finally say, look, this was the guy that came out on top. And in this episode where we talk about Khabib winning, that would really mean the world to him, I believe. And at that point, after defeating Tony Ferguson, what more will be left to do for Khabib Nurmagomedov? But first, we have to understand that Khabib Nurmagomedov is currently in his prime years. You may think to yourself, and there may be some debate on what age is the right age for a fighter to hit his prime and to maintain that peak condition. Some may say 28 years old, 29 years old, 30. After 31, you're pushing it, right? These could be all arguments many people could make. But I believe that the only true indicator for a fighter's longevity is in the manner at which the fights play out at. You have fighters who enter the sport young and leave the sport young because of damage they have accumulated. Khabib Nurmagomedov is right now 31 years old and has 28 professional fights, which is a lot of MMA fights to have. And if it was any other fighter with 28 total wins, some may have a few knockout defeats here and there, a few slugfests, things of that nature. Many battles that really tear down the body, break it down, and in terms of fight years, you get older much quicker. For example, Rory McDonald. When Rory entered the UFC as this prodigy fighter that was the pupil of George St. Pierre, greatest welterweight champion of all time, when he entered the UFC, he was very good. He was what many people thought the next generation of MMA fighters would be like. But unfortunately for Rory McDonald, he went through many tough fights that seriously shortened the longevity of his career. For example, his rematch fight with Robbie Lawler is obviously one fight that will never ever be forgotten in the world of MMA. Arguably the greatest welterweight championship fight in history. But out of that fight, Rory McDonald never came out the same. And right now, being 1 year younger than Khabib Nurmagomedov, he has already contemplated retiring and just showing a lack of interest in competing. Now at this point of his career, yes, he has shown that he has rekindled the flame for the sport, but just having that thought seriously go through your head is already enough to show that Rory at this point is just entering the tail end of his career. Whereas Khabib Nurmagomedov, the end is just very far away. And for Khabib Nurmagomedov, I see a future for Khabib that is very similar to his teammate Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier entered the sport very late. I believe he was already well past his 30. But because Daniel Cormier did not have the damage that many of these fighters by the age of 31 have, he still had his entire MMA career ahead of him. And so Daniel Cormier improved incrementally, but he kept at it and he became one of the greatest UFC fighters in history, a light heavyweight and heavyweight champion. So for Khabib Nurmagomedov, with him right now, I think that him not suffering any damage in his career, you can barely point out any fight in which Khabib Nurmagomedov came out with a cut eye, with a swollen eye, with an injury, nothing like that. The guy has taken barely any damage, which is just insane to think about for a fighter who has had 28 professional fights and has been fighting in the UFC for all this time. So for right now, if Khabib continues to dominate his opponents like he is right now, I believe the only real damage he will do to his body is in the gym. So I believe that the best of Khabib Nurmagomedov is yet to come. And because of that, age is not a factor. Retirement is not a nearby option. And because of this, we will be still looking at many more Khabib Nurmagomedov fights in the UFC. And one fight that is still brewing is a fight with Conor McGregor, the rematch. You may think to yourselves right now, Conor McGregor should not get a rematch. Well, you're right. But looking ahead in the future, we already would have had the fight between Tony happen, that's for one. And then by that point, we could have seen Conor McGregor compete for the second time this year, possibly against Justin Gaethje. And assuming he beats Justin Gaethje, then the rematch could happen, because at that point, Conor McGregor took out the only guy in the top 3 that is winning, right? Because Tony Ferguson would have lost, and him and Gaethje are the only 2 guys left that are actually in some sort of a contention, because Dustin Poirier lost, Kevin Lee lost, Al Iaquinta lost, Cowboy lost. Everybody else in the division has been losing. So apart from Conor and Justin Gaethje, there are no other real contenders waiting in line. So having these 2 fight is the most logical fight that could take place. So as I said, assuming the fight between Conor and Gaethje happens and Conor comes out victorious, then the rematch would be mandatory. And in that fight, who would be coming out as the victor? You know, many people say in the fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 229, Conor McGregor did not fight optimal. It did not fight efficient, did not fight calm. You know, these things are obviously factors that could have played into him losing. It could have been, you know, but the reality was this. At UFC 229, Khabib Nurmagomedov was as prepared as he would have ever been, coming out of back-to-back consistent performances defeating Barboza and Iaquinta. He at this point has found a very good balance with activity and consistency, and these things led to him improving to a point many people did not think was possible. And given more time to Khabib, improvements are still being made. So imagining Khabib Nurmagomedov defeating Tony Ferguson and then going into a fight with Conor McGregor, I would have to believe that at that point, Khabib Nurmagomedov would be way better than what he was fighting Conor McGregor in 2018. Now, at the same time, Conor McGregor will also be making his improvements, because going into the fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov, I believe at that point, respect was one aspect he did not have for Khabib's game. And as he did not have respect for Nate Diaz's game, he learned to give respect after losing in a crushing defeat. So for Conor McGregor to come out of the first Nate Diaz fight and rebuild himself and improve and come back better for the rematch was something I will always give him credit for. And I believe every loss is an opportunity for Conor McGregor to learn. Not many people, or many fighters I should say, really have this attitude towards their fighting game. And that was the deciding factor in Nate Diaz losing to Conor McGregor. I believe out of Conor and Nate at that time, Conor was the only fighter who made some real improvements, because after his performance against Conor for the first fight, Nate Diaz said that he was just out of shape, he was not really trained, right? Because these were all valid arguments. Now, with a full training camp and a diet that was making him bulk up to the 170-pound division just nicely, you would have to assume Nate Diaz would be performing much better. But in reality, it was Conor McGregor that outperformed Nate Diaz that night. So come fight nights, yes, Conor McGregor will be improved. But Khabib Nurmagomedov is not Nate Diaz. If you take a look at Nate Diaz's game, it hasn't really changed much from his early days to now. He has been the same old fighter he has always been. But when you take a look at Khabib, he has been improving. So when these two guys fight, you will realize that this illusion of, oh, Conor McGregor, when he loses, he gets better. That illusion will face reality as soon as they see that Khabib Nurmagomedov has improved as well. But on that night, the fighter who made the most improvements will be the one who comes out victorious. If we take a quick trip down memory lane, we will be seeing that Khabib Nurmagomedov really had the best performance of his career when he fought Conor McGregor. He was able to neutralize Conor McGregor setting his traps. He did not fall for any counters. He was able to beat Conor McGregor in a stand-up and then take him down and do what he does best. It doesn't get any better than that. Beating the fighter in his own game and then finishing him in your own game. Now, Conor McGregor has to fight differently. I think that is the obvious conclusion that can be made coming out of that fight. Nobody will say Khabib had to fight any other way than in the way that he fought. So what Conor McGregor can do is really put some good emphasis on not being overzealous. Don't be over aggressive. Don't get greedy. Because what Conor McGregor is very good at is making these opponents commit to mistakes and then countering them, right? Putting some good pressure on them and keeping the pressure on them. The more he can keep pressure on the opponent, the more opportunities he can create for himself to land a finishing blow. And against Khabib, I believe that he has to finish him. Going 5 rounds with Khabib is going to be a very difficult challenge, because going 5 rounds with a man who has been always in control of the pace and his opponents, I don't believe Conor McGregor can avoid getting taken down. And once he gets taken down, no amount of grappling training, no amount of preparation will get him ready, because a training camp or two cannot prepare Conor McGregor for the lifetime of grappling and sambo Khabib has had. So it really comes down to these both fighters doing what they do best in their own game. And when it comes to Conor McGregor, it is keeping your head in the game that will potentially get him a different result than what the first fight was. Now let's assume Conor McGregor fights brilliantly, right? He comes forward, very good with his pressure, not over aggressive, flicks his jab here and there, makes Khabib shooting for desperate takedowns, is able to stuff them, and then is able to represent that same pressure and just keep doing it over and over again to a point where you can find a big counter punch window. Now, people may think to themselves, if Conor McGregor can connect cleanly on Khabib, then he can put him out. I believe that if Khabib Nurmagomedov were to stand still and Conor McGregor loads up on his biggest left hook and connect right on the chin of Khabib, yes, then he could potentially knock him out. But we have to understand what Khabib did well in the first fight that made him avoid that in the first place. It was footwork, it was timing, it was speed that Conor McGregor did not have and that he was surprised by. That speed speed is something that can really offset Conor McGregor, because Conor McGregor, you know, like he says, timing beats speed. But if you can't time speed, then you get overwhelmed. And that was what we saw in the first fight. And that is something that you just cannot train. You can't, you know, physically get any quicker than you already are, because these two fighters are in their primes. So Khabib will still have the speed advantage. In terms of footwork, I think Conor is going to have many troubles being able to time him, because Khabib is very light on his feet. He can move around, he can get in and out, and most importantly, he can stick to the game plan and not make too many mistakes. Now, Khabib is human, he can make mistakes, and one mistake could be fatal. But just like going into the first fight, the narrative and the main key points that will bring themselves into this fight is that Conor McGregor, if he fights his fight, he could defeat Khabib. And if Khabib fights his fight, he could beat Conor once again. I'm not here to make a prediction for you guys, but Conor McGregor, if he goes into a rematch with Khabib Nurmagomedov, he will not be making the same mistakes that he made in the first fight, which caused him to lose position and dominance in the stand-up. Now, out of the two fighters, they both came out of that fight knowing how the other guy fights. And because of that, they will try to fight way better than what they did. But how far can they take it? Because Conor McGregor, if he gets tired, he can get backed up. And Khabib, he is a very quick and strong fighter, very explosive. He can pressure Conor McGregor again. And if he puts Conor McGregor on the back foot when he is tired, not only is he going to be able to really land big significant blows onto Conor McGregor, but he will most likely have him up against the fence, which will line Conor up perfectly for Khabib to then take him down. And for Conor McGregor, patience is going to be key. If he does not give in to Khabib's lateral footwork, if he gets a good read on what Khabib does and paces himself and fights very smart, throws only the strikes that he has to, and just slowly get into the fight, I believe then Conor McGregor can have some great success, because Conor was the only fighter that was able to win a round off of Khabib in the UFC. So in the end, we will still have our critics that say Conor McGregor doesn't deserve the rematch, he already lost the first fight. I believe that we should ignore those opinions, because this is indeed a fight that we all have to see once again, because it would just be a privilege to watch it go down once again. Because if Khabib wins in the rematch as well, and it just came off of defeating Tony Ferguson, then wow, what a stud he would be. No more comments, no more dispute. He is the guy. And let's just say Conor McGregor is able to defeat Khabib Nurmagomedov, then we have to see this fight for the third time, which I would not be against. Either way, there is still another fight that could happen, and that could be a Tony Ferguson rematch. Now, in this fantasy, world, in this theoretical scenario, let's just say that the fight between Khabib and Tony Ferguson was very close. It was very close. And if it was, I can only imagine how epic it would be. So I still hope that in the near future, we can get Tony and Khabib to fight. And if it is a close fight, let's have it one more time. Why not? Because this is the elite of the lightweight division. It doesn't get any better than these three. It really does not. So why not let them fight? And I hope they do. Because in the end, this is what the sport is all about. And if Khabib is the fighter who stands tall and is the last man standing, well, wow. What an end that would be. I thank you if you made it this far into the video. Leave a like on the video if you did, and subscribe if you are new to the channel. As I always say, in the end, only time will tell what will truly happen. For now, this was another episode of What If here on KENAN TV. In the next episode, I will talk about what if Tony Ferguson defeats Khabib Nurmagomedov. So stay tuned for that. And as always, I have been KENAN from KENAN TV, signing off. Later.